Good morning to all the participants joining us today in this fifth and last webinar of the series of the Latin American Initiative and Latin American and Caribbean Initiative for the Carbon Market. This is a webinar, as you well know, related to opportunities in terms of agricultures and participating in carbon markets. This is an event that we have carried out with our colleagues from ICA, LACA, and the CAF in the different countries we work in. And today, Ana Maria Zapata is joining us. She's a senior consultant from the Stonics Group for climate change issues. Also, Gerardoescudero, who is a representative of ICA as well in Panama. And Mr. Gerardo, who is a manager of a coffee program in Solidarity. So we would like to start by thanking them for their participation. And we are sure that everything that will be shared today will be completely fruitful to all people interested in this sector. And specifically regarding the possibilities of the sector in this carbon credit market, so to speak. So I will be presenting a short introduction just to give us a little bit of background, and I will give the floor to our panelists who will be sharing key information today. Just in order to tell you a little bit more about how this initiative has been taking place, these webinars have been comprised of a sequence of topics from the basics of the functioning of the carbon markets, how the value chain works, how it works in the international markets and access to market, how does it take place. And in December, we had a webinar regarding digital tools for transparency in carbon credit markets. And this fifth and last webinar, at least of this series, because for sure we will probably prepare new series in order to further advance in different sectors. In this webinar, we have focused on agriculture and related opportunities in terms of participating in the sector with the emission of carbon credits. All the recordings are accessible in this link we have shared here. You can find all the recordings of previous webinars, microsite, where you have been able to register or sign up for this event. And so far, up to date, we have had over 3,000 people registered and over 5,500 views on YouTube, and it's available in both languages. We also have other knowledge-based products that have been produced within the framework of this initiative. We have this diagnosis of the carbon market, which was put together as part of the starting point of this initiative, and soon we will have several series and editions of an observatory of the market, of the carbon market for Latin America and the Caribbean with regards to sustainable finance. And we hope you find this very interesting, not only as in terms of the knowledge, but also for networking purposes and interaction with other actors who are also part of this market. So why are we closing this series, and why did we prioritize agriculture in the framework of the carbon market? Where there's some important piece of data here. The agricultural ground can capture carbon to rates of up to 2.6 gigatons per year. And because the surface of a planet is covered by this substances, 1/3 of a planet, and we can also incorporate media to avoid or reducing emissions, even though it's the second contributor in terms of CO2 emissions. And even the agricultural and food system and the agricultural phase also accounts for 25 to 30% of emissions. And should changes not be implemented with traditional agriculture, this could increase up to 40% by 2050. And instead of contributing, it will be worsening the product, if the problem, if you will. So agriculture is the only sector that could pass from being a net emitter of greenhouse gases to becoming a net carbon capture source, should these changes be implemented in the soils and the different practices. So in terms of the sector, considering the reality we are immersed in, most of our producers and farmers, think about those smaller farmers in Latin America who still face different challenges such as their own productivity, profitability, access to markets, technical assistance, and other more basic issues. We must think that all this group of over 500 million small producers in the planet would be the main executors of the concept of how to make of agriculture a solution to climate change. And this is, in the words of Ferdinand World Award of Food Systems in 2020. And he also he contributes with us in this topic. So this, of course, sustaining the livelihood of producers, which is a key point. All this group of small producers sustains around 70% of food availability in the planet. So important investments need to be made in this field in agricultural production and entering the carbon market. Also, it's important to have resources, the right experts who conduct the dual analysis to analyze the plots of land, design the projects, and also are in charge of certification, commercialization, and keep the monitoring, reporting, and verification processes up to date. So these are some matters that we need to take into account, and some matters also to be overcome that have to do with public policy and also the interests of the private sector. So these are some of the facts around the carbon markets and agriculture in general, generative agriculture and these transitions. And one may ask, well, are producers in Latin America, should they be, or could they be able to adapt themselves to these scenarios they face in in a global landscape? So this is what we have addressed for today's presentation. We will have this presentation of, okay, we already have shed some light about the context that we will have Ana Maria Zapata, the senior consultant in Stonics based in Colombia. And she will be speaking about how from Stonics they are addressing these opportunities in the agricultural sector in the carbon market. Then we will have Ezio Varese. He is manager of the coffee program in Solidaridad Peru. And he will be explaining how this has taken place with some coffee growers and forestal systems in Peru. And we will be closing with Mr. Gerardoescudero, who will be sharing information about how in the ICA, in the context of Panama, has taken place around carbon credits in agriculture. And you can also find our streaming on YouTube, and you can also ask your questions, and our team will be recording your questions so that we can transfer these questions to our panelists. We will have a Q&A session at the end of this webinar, and there's some additional information that could also be interesting for the matters of this, for the purposes of this presentation. So we will be also sharing those links with you. So this is what we will be discussing today and the speakers who will be joining us. So we will start by giving the floor to Ana Maria Zapata from Stonics Group. Ana Maria is a chemical engineer with broad experience in different professional areas. She has performed as a specialist in sustainability in the Bancolombia Group, also as a specialist for different companies, both in Colombia and internationally, always in topics related to the environment, including climate change, renewable energies, and clean development and voluntary carbon markets. life cycle analysis, greenhouse gas inventory, carbon footprint, and forestal offsetting processes. And from this experiences, she has been working from Stonics, and we hand it over to Ana Maria. Thank you for joining us, Ana Maria. Nelson, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, for joining us. I want to thank CAF for this invitation, the Development Bank of Latin America. This is a very relevant topic, up to date for for every type of organization in the sector, because truth be told, there is a topic to be addressed and there is some risks, but also plenty of opportunities related to climate change. When we think about climate change, we think about all the risks, all the impacts, because it is quite evident. And it is very significant in our countries, even if we are not producing high emissions of greenhouse gases, we are highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So it is something that we need to address from all the different industries and sectors. So I will be sharing my screen. Can you see my screen? So as Leslie was mentioning, I work for Stonics. It's a company, a financial services company, and we operate around different financial products, derivatives, different commodities, futures, and the connection about this topic and climate change is very close to what we try to do. What we want to do is try to give access to our customers to carbon markets from different, or carbon credits from different standpoints. We have customers around the world, also offices around the world. We have branches around the world, and we have clients from different industries. And agriculture is one of the sectors that we have. All of the agricultural related sectors are very important. And we try to address climate change related issues from the standpoint of offsetting emissions, because for many companies, that is their alternative, but also from the standpoint of how to implement projects that allow to generate carbon credits and additional income for certain types of sectors. So we are specialists in risks. And this is where we put everything together, the connection and access to markets for our customers, as well as all the risk management around climate change. From this department, what we mainly do, what this department started in the company since last year, and we have been seeking to accompany this implementation of projects for our customers and aiding them in the addressing of this climate change related matters, how to carry out this neutrality and accounting around carbon credits. How can we support the development of those initiatives around mitigation? That on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have marketing, commercialization, trading, and providing access to markets, those customers that need to offset that in turn have the carbon credits. So we try to make this liaison, this connection for the commercialization, and from the financial solution standpoint as well, when it comes to financing projects, everything that has to do with project financing, monetization of assets, and carbon related assets. And from this perspective of monetization, carbon credits and the market could be seen from the standpoint of opportunities of turning those environmental liabilities into assets. We want to make this opportunity and monetize everything that we have that to some extent could be transformed in order to generate carbon credits. But in order to get there, we need to walk the way. We need to measure where we are at, what our current conditions are, what can we implement in order to increase the carbon reserves in the soil for a project. We need to define all the strategy and all the implementation, and there has to be a constant monitoring of performance in different projects. And at the end of the day, we will be able to have that monetization that could be what we are seeking without losing sight of the final target in terms of climate change and benefit as a whole for humanity. So when we think about the carbon market, I think you've seen this before in previous webinars, but I want to bring this up today because when we are immersed in agriculture, there's a trend or a tendency to think that just for the fact of having a crop or because of the fact of having a forest or a conservation area, we can have immediate access to these benefits or this monetization that is possible in carbon markets. And it is very important to mention that when we think about having access to carbon markets, we should always know that we must implement a project that enables us to go beyond a baseline. Nelson was mentioning it at the beginning. It is necessary to quantify and measure what my current situation is. And based on this, we should be able to identify what type of project could I implement or what kind of project could be implemented in order to increase those emissions or mitigation of emissions and increase carbon capture so that we can actually make a difference. So the fact of having these protected areas or agroforestal systems or that do not allow this access to carbon markets, there are other tools implemented by other governments. Like in the case of Colombia, there is payment for environmental services, which is a different tool from the standpoint of conservation that will just allow access to certain resources or certain products. But when we think about carbon markets, we should always think about the fact that we will have to do something different to what we are doing. So that is very important to bear in mind. In agriculture, there are well-known opportunities that are more popular, so to speak, like in conservation projects and other projects that imply like capturing carbon in soils or trees and forestry related projects where this forest cover is increased. So this is very common, but there is also a possibility or many opportunities from the standpoint of management of soil management and everything that has to do with the use of fertilizers, waste management, and crops for to take advantage of forests and improving and having other types of products that can or projects that can improve practices that would enable to implement these projects that can be registered in carbon markets such as grazing improvement practices and so forth. So this is supported in the market with the methodologies available today and many projects that are being implemented. So from the standpoint of standards, you know that there is a regulated market. It may be in standby for now because it's undergoing a restructuring process, the CBM market, and also the voluntary market, which is the market that is more active today. And this standard has or include certain methodologies that enable access to carbon markets through the implementation of markets or of projects related to the use of land. Other standards, such as the gold standard or Ser Carbono, which is a Colombian standard, a well-known and recognized standard, and many projects are being registered in this standard. So this enables for the implementation of these projects related to capture and the capturing in the soil, carbon capture in the soil, and other practices that enable for this. Because from the methodologies, and this is also important to bear in mind, there are certain constraints. Like I mentioned before, just the fact of having a crop does not mean that I will have access to carbon markets, but that is the baseline. So there are some restrictions regarding carbon capture in that existing crop, and we will find this in different methodologies. So these additional practices, such as changing fertilizers or the way in which wastes are managed and so forth, will enable us to increase carbon capture in soils, and also practices such as crops under the shade, which imply that there is an additional capture to the one that's already existing in current crops. I will give you some examples of the projects that are being implemented nowadays. In an overview, as mentioned by Nelson, and in the second webinar, you can see who the different actors in this process are. And once the project is identified and drafted, projects need to be validated. So it's important to consider all this process into account, the time it takes. So implemented a carbon-related project can take a year or a year and a half, depending on the standard it is based upon or the methodology to be used, but it is a long process. So it is, the most important thing is to ensure there is reliability and traceability of information in a process that is audited from end to end in order to provide reliability that should always be present in carbon markets. So there should be an external validation. There should be external assessors and or evaluators to determine whether there is compliance with the appropriate standards or the corresponding standards. And subsequently, every year, these monitoring processes will take place in order to prove that the project continues to be developed according to the initially established conditions. And this is shown through a yearly verification by an external auditor who dictates whether a project continues to increase carbon capture in soils and trees, if there's a permanence of the crop, is it being developed in the right way? And finally, based on the standard, it will be possible to issue those carbon credits to be sold or commercialized. So at the end of the day, the carbon credits are the outcome of all this process. And depending on the type of developer, project developer, or company in the process, what oftentimes happens or is done is partaking in this development in order for the owners of the farms or plots of land to have access to these resources. And furthermore, those carbon credits can cover the costs. So something that's really common in this agricultural based projects is that the size of a project needs to be sufficiently meaningful in order to cover all the costs of transactions. So for this type of projects in agriculture, it is very common to see clusters of projects or groups of projects. So in a single project, there are different people, different stakeholders, different families, different associations related to a specific crop or sustainable practice. And all of them contribute to generate a project that represents enough carbon credits. So there are bigger projects, but in our countries, we have smaller farmers. So this provides them with the possibility of having access to this carbon credits. I will give you an example later on about these cases. So just to give you an example of those projects that have been implemented. For example, there is a group, a collective project of coffee and cocoa beans, and these are long-term projects. So this is a project that has taken place in Peru under the shade, and this project ensures best practices, but also additional sources of income for the farmers, and therefore the possibility of improving many conditions in their livelihood. And this project is a collective project in Colombia. Many of these projects can start from existing crops where practices are improved, but also with the need of improving the conditions of the soils that have been degraded or damaged because of certain agricultural practices. So it is necessary to change certain practices. This project in Colombia, for example, changes um, some practices, uh, cattle raising practices for forestry-based practices in order to regenerate the ground, those soils that have been used for other purposes. In other countries beyond Latin America, just to give you an example, in the market, there are around 1,950 registered projects, and out of them, 250 projects are related to agriculture, forests, and other uses of the land. And we can see that around 41 projects have to do with sustainable management practices. In other words, this is a topic where we still have a long way to go. There's a huge opportunity of implementing projects. And in reality, when all projects or the existing projects are reviewed, all those projects that have been developed in our area, we can see that this is just starting. These practices are just emerging in a region. This is an example of a collective project as well, where families and farmers came together. This is a sustainable management practices. This was in Kenya Agricultural Carbon Project. And the other, to the right-hand side, we can see a project in Guatemala that sought to regenerate areas due to poor practices. So this is how it was done. This was the scope of the project, and this is to show that, in fact, methodologies are there in place. There are companies that are interested in buying and being off-takers. And as I said, these projects have a very important meaning. Nowadays, the indicators are that measure this projects are not only climate change based. There is a global view within the framework of sustainable development goals. And this makes this kind of project very relevant. And they become very appealing to off-takers because of all those co-benefits being generated for society, for people on the countryside in order for them to improve their livelihood. So just one final slide in order to show a standpoint or a point of view that is very applicable to all the agricultural products. There's an urgent need from providers of having carbon neutral products beyond being carbon neutral. For instance, many crops such as many plantations such as coffee, which are carbon neutral, the possibility of being carbon neutral will enable producers to have a differentiating factor in products. And I want to bring this up because many times we could be, or the methodologies of the carbon market could be restricting access that we could have to the market. But these conditions also entail benefits and opportunities from all the way from the capturing carbon and climate change, like the possibility of producing carbon neutral products and delivering buyers products with certain characteristics that not only entail benefits but are also appealing and have very important benefits for the environment. So this is the end of my presentation. In interest of time, this will be all. Thank you for your participation. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer. The presentation will also be made available for all of you. So any additional concern, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much, Ana Maria, and thank you very much, Stonics, for this willingness to be part of our webinar. I also wanted to highlight many topics you have mentioned that are very important in order to understand the process. Because as you mentioned, it is perhaps people mistakenly think that whoever has a crop can immediately apply and have access to carbon credits, but there's a process, some requirements that need to be complied with to meet this baseline. And also over time, what is necessary in order to add value and to be able to market products in this carbon market. So it is very important. And like in your final slide, like you mentioned it, along the supply chain, it's important to highlight these opportunities in order to make all this carbon neutrality path traceable, where we find plenty of opportunities in the market. Thank you very much once again. And now we will give the floor to Mr. Ezio Varese. He is the manager of the coffee and cacao cocoa program in Solidaridad. He is an agronomist and a specialist in certification process. He's a senior auditor of agricultural products in organic and sustainable production, amongst other certification systems related to sustainability. He currently works with Solidaridad Peru, and he is a member of the Ecological Agriculture Network with 25 plus years experience in development of value chain products and cooperating with institutions such as Solidaridad, of course, UTZ, which is the Sustainable Standard, also Greenback and Double F, and the Valle Grande Institute from Peru, among other institutions, always related to and linked to the sector. Ezio, thank you very much for joining us, and you have the floor. Good morning, Nelson, and thank you very much, Kath, for this opportunity of presenting this experience, the Peruvian experience that we are carrying out here with Solidaridad, with Peru and other countries in the world. Good morning. I want to greet all the attendees and share with you the experience that we have been developing in Peru with small coffee growers and cocoa growers. Our experience with carbon credits in small coffee growers and agricultural and forestry systems. So this is framed under the relation that has Solidaridad Peru with a new and Acorn, which is a new scheme, is a different methodology to the one presented by Ana Maria. It's another option focused only on small growers of coffee and cacao or cocoa. It has been on for 4 years, and it has to do with products, agricultural products. I wanted to just give you an overview of how this methodology works. We have the supply, the small, on the one hand, we have farmers with their day-to-day activities. They also have or carry out practices. They can be upset with the best practices and carbon capture, as you mentioned, Nelson. There are around 500 million of small producers in the world, 500 million small producers in the world of coffee. There are around 8 million small coffee growers who may contribute to capturing carbon and also performing a sustainable agriculture, more and more sustainable, in order to reduce the carbon footprint and lowering emissions and so forth. So Solidaridad is an ally in the Acorn platform. We work with small growers, farmers. We monitor them, we evaluate them, and we present these small growers individually or collectively. And they are registered in the platform, which the engine of this platform is the verification of carbon removal units in the different systems of these small agriculturists or farm workers. And through other companies that work with Acorn, such as Intelligence, they carry out a measurement, satellite measurement, in order to corroborate what the difference has been between the current biomass and the previous year's biomass. This is translated into a bioscrew, which are the several CRUs, or carbon removal units. This is turned into a document, or this carbon credit is offered in the international market. The demand in the international market, in this case, Standard Chartered or Microsoft. So they acquire these credits, and through the platform, the money is transferred directly to every farmer in their personal bank accounts. So in this case, there are many advantages because it's a very quick transaction. This can be executed very easily. It is very easy to corroborate or confirm practices. In this way, farm workers can be compensated for the work they carry out. So this is an incentive for them to continue to keep up these activities. And with the technological packages that Solidaridad has developed, it is possible for them to have a more efficient mechanism. So all this platform, this methodology, is verified on a yearly basis and monitored by Planio, which is an external auditor such as Vera in the market. And they verify that all the characteristics and trust are there, that it's a reliable process, so that this is a credit with a high value. Like I mentioned, this is a platform that has started recently, 3-4 years ago. It was launched, and 120,000 CRUs have been traded, and with over 15,000 producers, and over 10 countries: Peru, Nicaragua, Colombia, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Tanzania, India, and many other countries that are joining currently. There's a website. You can find the link in the presentation, where you can see all the projects and where all these small producers are. whether in forestry systems that are existing or the new ones. The fact of the matter is that these small farmers from 10 hectares, these are the focus of this platform. The idea is for them to be able to have a renewal in their young plantations and to plant trees. And every year, it is possible to measure a delta that subsequently becomes or is turned into a capture that can be positive. There's also a point where this curve may decrease and become negative. So year after year, in these contracts, there's 20-year contracts signed with these small workers. Uh, they are paid 20 euros for every CRU that is marketed, and 80% of them goes to the farmer's account, and 20% is allocated for the maintenance of the platform, and 10% for for Solidaria's operation of meaning verification and other costs and follow up and monitoring practices. But the purpose of all this is for workers who used to have traditional agricultural processes, and like in Peru and in other parts of the world. The purpose is for them to have this possibility that of having these additional trees, and it could become into other products, and we can show you this development later on. It could be uh, also timber and other sources, but it's important to make sure that these producers have a better quality of product of coffee beans, have the option of selling timber as well beyond the 20 years when the contract is over. They can also have access to different environmental services where they have other different types of rewardings for this or rewards for this, so and bonuses. So this regenerative production model is based on how to reduce emissions. It's based on reducing emissions, keeping up the productivity, improving the quality, and mitigating or showing how within a monocrop through certain modifications to what they usually do, how can they mitigate climate change, and also how can they prepare for adaptation when climate change is excessive and it is not possible to continue this type of crops such as coffee and cocoa. And also in Peru, the deforestation rates have been quite complex in Peru. So this is very relevant. This project is implemented along with 3,744 families, coffee growing families in San Martin, Peru, with a comprehensive approach based on coffee crops, agricultural and forest systems. And we focused on not only restructuring the traditional practices around coffee growing, but also how to make it possible for these coffee growers to step aside from the traditional practices and switch to trees that can produce timber, where they can get the timber from wood. And with this proposal, we have achieved up to planting up to 200, 260 trees. And this not only entails access to carbon credits, but and having better quality crops or harvests, but as uh, way into the process, 30 or 40 years after, they have quality timber and wood that can be sold in the national market. It will turn into pieces of furniture. It can be used in the construction industry and other industries. And carbon will continue to be captured. And this way, the model will continue to be profitable in the short term and in the long term, the short, mid, and long term, with a better income generation. So this is with the farms of Peruvian growers. And we started with Acorn on the last year with 1,009 producers, 187 of which were women. The owners of these farms, when we have a total of 1,554 plots of land, of crops, 1.3 hectares on average. And these 1,554 plots, or lots of land, have captured from 2021 to 2022 over 10,000 tons of equivalent carbon removed from the atmosphere, with a total value of around $216,000. That's a total compensation 2022. However, it is important to mention that not all producers abide by this, since they have older practices. Not all of them have achieved a positive delta. In that year, there was a 70% positive delta achieved. And these coffee growers will be receiving the CRUs, something around 18 CRUs for producer, $230 a year they receive as an additional income or additional resource to for their crops, and this helps them a lot. They can be more profitable. There are some farmers that have achieved $2,400 or $400. They achieve this type of income, so it is possible, provided that they manage to plant more trees up to certain limits, so that they can have the proper management of this forestry system or forest system in such way that they can maximize the quality of the wood or timber, the biomass, and the maximum volumes to the end of cycle when they need to cut the trees. So this is one of the, well, these are some of the, this is one of the beneficiaries when he was handed the check. And well, this is the example, the experience I wanted to share with all of you. Here is my contact info. And through social media, Twitter, Facebook, Solidaridad, all the social media and Solidaridad, you can find more information. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ezio. And I think it is very important to see, to take a look at the questions that we have already been asked. Many of the doubts people had have been clarified with Ana Maria's and your presentation. For example, how to monetize, how to pass from having all this or going through this process, how everything is monitored and verified, and the technology behind it, the Bank, Dutch bank you are a partner with, providing this technology. So how is it possible to materialize an actual income and all the technical support that you're providing? So thank you very much. Thank you and Solidaridad for joining us today. And we will be answering other questions that have not been answered yet in the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And finally, we have another presentation. We have Mr. Gerardoescudero, who will be presenting the last presentation. He's the manager of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture in Panama. He is Mexican and economist from the UNAM Mexico University with a PhD in planning and agriculture by the Sorbonne University in Paris, France, and with a broad professional experience in economy or economics and planning, and with an emphasis in agriculture for sure, and agro industry in rural areas in countries in many countries, including Europe. He has worked for his 6 year in as a technical advisor, principal advisor, and he was also in FAO. He was a technical manager in ICA and in many countries such as Nicaragua and El Salvador and Nicaragua and currently Panama. He has worked intensely, and we have been cooperating very closely. Thank you very much, Gerardo, for joining us today, and of course, thank you to ICA, uh, this Cooperation Institute we have such a close relation with. So you have the floor. Thank you very much, Nelson. Warm greeting to all of the panel members, all of the colleagues, and of course to all the attendees in this webinar. And those who will be watching us later on through the streaming. I will be presenting a few slides in order to present what ICA has been developing in terms of carbon bonds in terms of capture and the marketing and the international arena. So I will be sharing my presentation. Please let me know if you can see my screen. Yes, we can see your presentation. Okay, thank you. So the first thing I would like to mention is that from the perspective of ICA, first and foremost, the market or the carbon bond market is huge. It's immense. It's immense. But in turn, it is facing different challenges and situations we need to tackle. And it's not only about obtaining additional resources, which are often marginal for producers, but also making this available for more or to have a broader reach to more farmers. And there has to be a transformation of what they do to a greater level of productive sustainability, environmental sustainability. It's not only the resources or the carbon credits or bonds that are obtained that are marginal. And that doesn't mean they're not important, but it is important for this to be accompanied by increases in the profitability of our producers. Second, there are many actors in this um, framework. There are over 2 billion producers in the world who are facing very significant problems that have to do with these carbon bond initiatives. First, mitigation. We need to continue to reduce and avoid the emission of greenhouse gases. And number 2, we need to adapt to climate change. We continue to be very vulnerable. And my colleagues have mentioned this as well. 3, the change will take place to the extent there are enough financing resources that are returnable in order to keep up the development and also be environmentally friendly. And also, it is very important to have government policies to accompany small and medium-sized producers through this integrated strategy. So the ICA has specialized in dialogue and institutionality in order to speed up the process of small producers joining, and this within the framework of public policies, but also private stakeholders that have a certain participation. There are 2 views. Some of them are like more solidarity based, but other are part of the private sector. So we must continue to boost these initiatives. And this is what ICA has been doing, not only in America, but beyond, in order to foster dialogue and mechanisms for integration and engagement of different actors. But ICA, more recently, with the purpose of finding what could be the role of ICA and all public and private players in Latin America and the Caribbean, what could be the role? How could they play as one more actor, but also the engagement with multiple actors, both from the private and public sectors. So we started working on certain projects, and I will be presenting the experience that we have been developing for 2-3 years in Panama with a very specific action that has to do with the value chain of rice. Rice is the key food chain, and Panama is one of the main consumers, per capita consumers of rice in the world. So I will state as follows. The first action we are developing is that we have identified a baseline regarding the project I will refer to, and we have measured quite accurately the poor practices or practices that are usual in Panama in the rice growing process and that are away from science and technology. They entail poor practices and lack of planning and preparation of the soil. There's no analysis of soil conducted. There's the use of different, not the right seeds. There's no prevention of plagues and illnesses. So it is a very irrational and inefficient process. So everything that we have managed to identify for the last few years and what we have also registered, we have has provided us a baseline in the national and international market in Panama and in other countries. So there was a project that started 2-3 years ago, and through direct intervention with 300 producers, rice producers, mechanized production, and a project that we called Euroclima Plus, we managed to bring together 300 producers. And throughout all the cycles of rice growing, we managed to conduct this analysis. We managed to demonstrate under scientific measurement a reduction of around 38% of emissions of greenhouse gases as a product of doing things differently, providing support to producers. And second, we managed to increase the profitability of producers from 6 cents per dollar invested to 39 cents per dollar invested while doing things right. As a product of this intervention, we designed the NAMA, meaning those mitigation actions that are nationally appropriate and that are focused on the correction of poor practices highlighted at before. So nowadays, there's this survey, there's this soil analysis, there's fertilization with this analysis, and there's a regulated planting of seeds based on density. There's monitoring control for pest control, for weeds control, insect control. And as part of NAMA, there's a leveling of terrains and irrigation systems and monitoring control of diseases. So this is very important and it has been registered nationally and internationally. As a product of this project that ended last year, we are about to develop another project with Bitlab that has been approved and has been designed to implement NAMA in a pilot test with 100 producers. But it aims at another initiative that we are carrying out in order to cover all these rice producers that produce 98% of rice, meaning 1,400 producers. So the second project is a massive project, and we want to reach 70,000 hectares to produce 40,000 tons of carbon bonds. So this is what I will be presenting, the pilot test with Bitlab, because we want to learn from all this process in order to locate the role or understand the role that ICA can play in this huge and complex, immense market that offers great opportunities specifically or especially for those small and medium-sized producers. So here we have the Bitlab project we have with 100 producers. We provide support throughout the whole cycle, from the preparation of the soil to the harvest, through mechanisms with 100 growers. We work with them hand by hand with a methodology of learning as we do, and abiding by the NAMA guidelines. In the implementation of this NAMA, I just presented these guidelines and practices. So this is supported by or accompanied by a blockchain platform for traceability and registry of the productive cycle. Everything will be registered in a blockchain-based platform in order to create the scientific-based measurements of all the practices developed, and in order to provide information throughout the process, all the way to being able to place those carbon bonds in a marketplace. There's also a third digital platform that combines all satellite information and data to complete this monitoring, both climate monitoring and satellite monitoring. Through algorithms and artificial intelligence, there will be a comprehensive supplementary registry provided every week around different variations of climate and the potential diseases and pests. And there's a fourth platform, Climate Trade. It is a specialized platform, a marketplace that offers carbon bonds. So this is a whole, this all comprises or builds up a system that enables for the exact scientific measurement of the processes. So when it comes to offering the bonds, there's traceability of case, all the monitoring, all the MRV, and all the different actors who will comply their role in with governance. And this way, there can be a massive methodology for different types of producers and different types of value chains. Of course, as I mentioned it, obtaining carbon bonds for producers, it will always be a good thing. It will be $200, $400, $500 at the end of a cycle. That's important without hesitation, without any doubt. But for us, what's important is the blend of this regarding the rationality we operate under, and which will entail increases in their profitability just because of doing things right. They will be able to reduce unnecessary costs, and they will be able to adapt to best practices. And this way they can increase their income by 400%. So we think that both sources of income are very important, the marginal increase and those coming from carbon credits or bonds. So in order to have a clear idea of all this system that uses technological platforms and blockchain for measurement and registry of information, there's a physical component, which is the camp or boot camps or schools, field work. The producer will have all the information in their smart, and once they are trained on these technologies, they will use their devices to issue this information and have direct control in their own cases. Of course, there are several stakeholders intervening in this project. The key axis is ICA and Bitlab, providing the resources. In the case of ICA, the technical capability of field schools, they provide that, and actors such as the ministries of agricultural development and research institutions, the Latin American Fund of Rice, universities, platforms. Scientific and technical measurement will be replicated as we did 2 years ago with the Catholic University of Valparaíso in Chile, Pontificia Universidad Católica from Chile. And this way, we can have in the country those actors who can carry out the measurements without having to reach out to external associations or institutions. So we have the Ministry of the Environment, Association of Rice Growers, and other other bodies. So when we analyze the current status of the market and carbon bonds, specifically in the voluntary international market, there's still processes of adjustment and conditioning of different types of methodologies that prevail. There are important questions and concerns that emerge that have to do with the scientific and technical capability of measurement and the participation of actors who validate, register data. And also, we need to make sure that to avoid conflict of interests and enough actors to increase reliability. Of course, the use of digital platforms such as blockchain make this process more robust and solid. And also, it is important to determine how can we speed up the process these processes take in order for more actors to partake of these processes in a harmonized manner. ICA includes or tackles 34 countries in the world. So we work directly with the governments and ministries of agriculture. We believe that ICA could play some sort of supplementary role in this market to facilitate the speeding up, the expediting, and uh, massification of the resources. At the end of the day, we deem the transformation of agricultural and forest systems and agro-industrial systems in our countries, we deem they need to be improved and expedited and sped up. So this is the environment we move on. So we consider that global governance and regional governance and national governments should accelerate these steps through pilot tests, just as you have been developing those projects from the commercial standpoint. The ICA opens its door to start pilot tests that allow us to find our place within a Latin American and Caribbean place in order to play a specific role in line with the actors involved and to foster a process in a win-win with a win-win relation where small and medium-sized farmers also win. Finally, we deem it's very important to apply NAMA guidelines, and we can escalate these guidelines and value chains. I think this is a very important process, being able to abide by this monitoring, revision, and verification processes of greenhouse gas emissions, to review methodologies and to establish this satellite verification. This is something very practical, using artificial intelligence and using scientific measurement and using national capabilities, and also engaging actors not only in this agricultural and food chains, but also in other chains by engaging youngsters and women who can also work in this using this type of tools and methodologies. And of course, we need to explore the governance, certification, and accreditation systems and trust in a way that these markets can continue to specialize more and more, can increasingly become more serious, and also gain the trust of takers and bond buyers. So towards the democratization of the systems, we need to speed up all this tools, make all these tools and systems massive, establishing a government, public and private governance system that may enable to accompany such important processes. So I will make a pause here in case there are any questions or comments. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gerardo. And perhaps I would like to highlight some of the topics you mentioned that have to do with the comments or some questions we got through the platforms. When you mentioned the NAMA, we realized that on the way of becoming carbon certified, this could be this could permeate productive systems, and we can be certified and also gain additional incomes. But the change in paradigm, the change in terms of productive practices creates a leap towards sustainability. Like in the case you mentioned, in the case of rice, using resources more efficiently, applying the products that are actually used in the soil because a previous soil analysis has been conducted and not just a traditional practice. Well, those changes will result in changes in profitability or increases in profitability of the producer and of course their livelihood. So it's a comprehensive approach, if you will. It's not only about generating the credits, but also all this change entails an improvement for the farmer or the producer as a whole in general. Okay, so we will open the floor for questions. We believe that some of the certification mechanisms and accreditation mechanisms, well, some of those doubts may be solved through the presentations, but perhaps we will address those questions that are more specific, and hopefully we will have time for more questions. Some people have been asking about the methodological requirements. Where can you find these? Well, I think all the standards have been mentioned, all the methodology, so we could further expand that information or contact our speakers in order to further expand on what they have mentioned. But there are some that are asking questions, and I would like to address our three panelists so that they can freely and openly answer these questions in a two-way direction as a conversation. Um, Someone is asking, how are these implementation costs covered? Perhaps in your experience, you can let us know in the different strategies you have been part of. How have you managed to cover costs? Well, in the case of our work with coffee growers, the first phase started with grants from some projects we had with international cooperation. But basically, they need to submit the georeferenced maps of their farms with all the internal and external polygons, with all the identification of all the different zones, with forest areas. And so there are some forms they can download from the internet, and that way they submit this documentation. We go through this documentation, and that is included within the percentage we get, the grants that we get for the work we do. So it's basically free. It has no cost. And we also provide training sessions so that they are aware of what they need to comply with. They also sign a contract with the platform, a 20-year contract. So the implementation cost for the producer is just filling out their file. In the case of Peru, just a few farmers have those drawings or maps, so they need to hire an external consultant, and they charge around $80 for these drawings. And for what we have seen in the first year, the producer can recover that initial investment with the carbon credits they receive at the end of the process. So, well, it's a temporary investment or an initial investment in case um, um, they are applying for this. Also, local bodies, local governments are also have also been encouraged to contribute to this. And from Solidaridad, we are training different consultants in the different regions where these studies are taking place or these processes. And It seems to be that we will be receiving funds from the European Union that will be reaching the third world. And in order to export products such as coffee and other products, we will be receiving these funds. So that would also be helpful in the short term. Thank you, SEO. Perhaps Ana Maria and Gerardo would like to add something. Otherwise, there's another question. They're asking whether there is a minimum area in terms of hectares in order to be part of this. And what is the estimated time? Perhaps it was mentioned before, but it has to do specifically with this process. Thank you. Regarding the size of projects, and then I want to link this to the previous question. As I mentioned, the most important thing is having an area that is big enough to generate the credits so as to covering all the costs, not only for the implementation of the project, but also the development of the project within the carbon market, the registration and so on. So it has to be big enough. In terms of forests and agriculture, it is very difficult to talk about a specific minimum area because capturing carbon will always be related to the type of crop. For instance, the type of tree, how fast the tree grows. A measurement needs to be done in order to determine what certain species are able to capture in terms of carbon. So in this type of projects, it's not so easy to say an X number of hectares is used or required. But there's a feasibility study conducted, and it's usually done in order to estimate what is that potential for carbon credits of a certain area, of a certain crop, and determine whether it is feasible or not. So those studies are done by the developers. We do them. They pay for them, and we estimate. When it comes to collective projects or groups of people coming together for the development of one project, and there is for example, in the first coffee project that I showed you, the example I showed you, the project enabled for smaller areas, like 0.5 hectares. There are projects that are smaller in terms of the area, but since it is a collective project, they can put all the areas together. And in the current models that we have for the implementation of projects, there's usually a negotiation, as you mentioned, where there's a participation. And those of us who develop the projects also have that possibility of having a financial muscle that enables to leverage all the development of the project for the farmer not to have to use resources out of pocket. And at the end, when the carbon credits are generated and sold, then those credits will be allocated and those initial costs will be covered. So also, depending on the type of project, there are organizations or multilateral banks that are working in the implementation of this type of projects that also have resources for these implementations. Thank you. I would like to make a couple of comments. I believe it is important to make a distinction between the costs of all the measurement, review and monitoring, and from what other costs that need to be considered. Since there tends to be a belief that since I am an I participate in agriculture, I am a farmer, a grower, I can have access to carbon credits, but it's also costly to transform to go green is costly. So that is also a part of the cost. All of the process, everything implied in introducing a platform, a system, or methodologies, all the process, all of this scaffolding, so to speak, covers a percentage that, depending on how big a project is, as mentioned by Ezio and Ana Maria, there has to be a high or bigger size in the market in order for it to make sense, and to have at least this 20% of the cost in order to cover the expenses until it is those credits are offered in a marketplace, and there could be they could be traded. So ICA, the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation, is trying to address all these questions. First point, there has to be a public policy process for small producers, especially where there's a transition. And this can be with the Green Pact of the European Union and other resources of the government, but also with resources of producers. If we try to keep this paternalistic approach, there will be a deficiency. And here in Panama, in the case of rice, there will be, in this project, there will be 100 producers, but they will be covering it with loans, with commercial loans. In order to implement these NAMA guidelines, they will be financing themselves with loans. So everything that has to do with field schools, plus all the cost of platforms, two of them have a greater cost. The final one, the marketplace, just well, these costs covered with the Bitlab and the EEC in order to accompany this. So we have to be crystal clear about this. If it's only big producers, if it's only the producers, then only the big producers will be able to take advantage of this. But the thing here is, stop opening the gap between big producers and small producers, because in Latin America and the Caribbean, small producers play an important role. So, and also the use of methodologies and certification processes. I think this is something such as it's like the organic certification. It has to be international entities with the reputation, with development that has been endorsed by the market. But there are also national certifications, such as the Organic National Certification in Panama, or the Voluntary National Market in Panama for the trading of carbon funds. So to the extent we use international methodologies, where we believe that the core of this of trust is in these processes, and there are stakeholders that are usually external to these processes and can fulfill the role. In the case of ICA, we are trying to explore other methodologies that are close to international methodologies and put together partnerships with actors that have achieved much progress in this regard. So we would like to have this interaction with actors that in Latin America and the Caribbean are performing different roles. Thank you very much. And as you all know, in the initiative, in the ELAC, you will be joining us as a focal point in the roundtable of experts that are joining us in order to strengthen this initiative. We have some other questions. For example, how are risks considered and managed in this 20-year contracts? What happens if there's a forest fire in year number 9 or 11? And what happens if someone fails to comply? If one of the parties fails to comply, what happens in that case? In those cases, what would happen? Thank you, Nelson. As a matter of fact, as Gerardo mentioned, it, there is a lot of work behind this, but for this, there are many developments that are taking place for the sector. In the case of Peru, we have been developing all this work since 15 years ago. All the studies necessary to determine what are the volumes, what are the best options, what are the best practices, how do small producers change their, or how can they change their activities? And there's a lot of work behind this to make sure they can follow the practices. And there are also some uh, channels for training purposes, for technical training, and for these producers to promote this through word of mouth. And in order for all of this to be sustainable in the future, and we don't need to repeat things all over again on a day-to-day basis. And that way we can also reduce costs because these costs have been covered by international cooperation. We everything has been possible thanks to international cooperation, and everything is in hands of whoever requests that. In the case of Nelson's question, the platform, the model that Acreon provides, well, every CRU is guaranteed by a buffer with credit, with carbon credits that are kept or stored for these potential risks. As you mentioned, that there could be a fire, there could be a forest fire or any type of problem in the plot of land, and those carbon credits turn into smoke. But these buckets that have a percentage of around 30%, they are stored in order to comply and guarantee to whoever buys those credits that their credits are preserved and protected. There's a way of mitigating those risks. However, if any of these producers decide to quit, there's always a buffer. And also, risks are measured by group because in Peru, we have a way of acting. In Colombia, there's another way of acting. In Africa, Asia, Nicaragua, everywhere, it's different. So depending on the context, PAMI or the international certifier guaranteeing the model, internationally well known, well, they are the ones who, in line with studies performed in the areas, they will determine whether the risk can be or the buffer is greater than 30% in order to preserve the corresponding contingencies that may take place. Or if there's a lower risk, we can further reduce the risk and generate a surplus for beneficiaries. Thank you. I think that would be my answer to this question. Thank you very much, Ezio. Gerardo, please go ahead. Yes, I just wanted to add something to it, as you mentioned. In a transformation of a current status of doing things to another status, there should be the from the origin. Everything has to be related to this intervention with banks, regardless of the source. There should be coverage. It is more expensive not to have any type of insurance. So this is new, and if in the should anyone fail to comply in the marketplace, there should be some type of regulation I'm not familiar with. As you have shed some light on this, but from the origin, the whole process should be covered through a risk analysis. In the case of rice, in the case of Panama, the Instituto del Seguro Agropecuario takes part of this. I'm not sure about the demand side, but Ezio has shed some light on this topic already. Thank you very much, Gerardo. There is another question about whether you're familiar with a mangrove, any mangrove conservation process, and what is the scope for change, or do you have any reference regarding this type of projects? Yes, nowadays there are some projects in mangrove areas. In conservation projects, there is a specific methodology for the case of mangroves. There's also a specific methodology, and conservation process projects are based on the principle of avoiding damage to what already exists. So for these projects, regardless whether it is a mangrove or forest, in countries, there are some indicators of mangrove loss rates in certain areas of countries, as well as forest loss rate. And there's what they do is a calculation of the loss being avoided. And based on this, one can determine what the stored carbon or the carbon captured is over time because of the fact of avoiding the loss of swamps or mangroves. If I'm not mistaken, there are 3 mangrove projects in the world. There's a methodology that is new that is being implemented in this project, and it's based on this loss rate in mangrove, uh, uh, thanks to conservation projects. Thank you, Ana Maria. And there's also a question about experiences in coffee growing in Venezuela, or coffee growers that have had access to this carbon credits. I'm not familiar with any projects in Venezuela. We have been working in Central America and South America, not in Venezuela. I'm not familiar with any specific experience, but from the projects registered in the market currently, I can't remember. I don't remember Venezuela being there. I'm not sure if you are familiar with any projects. Ezio or Gerardo, are you familiar with projects in Venezuela? No, we are not sure. Not really. Well, some months ago, I was approached by a group in a cooperative in Venezuela that wanted to implement a similar project to the one we do. Unfortunately, due to political reasons, it hasn't been possible um, to carry out. We would have to take a closer look at the Venezuelan legislation, whether it is allowed. Well, this was a short presentation, but there are many things we could talk about in the context, and part of those requirements have to do with political affairs of countries, specifically carbon credit carbon credit trading and markets and so forth. There are many things we would need to um, learn first or make sure first. Thank you, Ezio. And I believe that clarification is key for the person for whoever asked this question. You could further expand by researching around the regulations in the country and whether there is any type of restriction in this regard in order to go forward with this type of initiatives. There's another question about whether there's experience where mitigation is achieved through the use of organic supplies. I believe, yes, some of the experiences you mentioned do. Well, in the case of the experience in Peru, it's basically the biomass generated by trees that provide shade to the crop. But the work that we have developed, or the work we offer, and we transfer to smaller producers in Peru and other parts of the world, there's also a reduction of emissions that could be channeled through a project. However, unfortunately, I do not have a specific solution to recommend in the top of my mind right now. We have been studying a couple of options, but we still don't have the specific or concrete information in order to disclose it, just as the experience that we have had with the Acorn platform. Thank you, SEO. And just want to comment perhaps for the discussion, for the purposes of this discussion, and we will be closing in interest of time, but I think it's something Gerardo mentioned. It's something that's always on the table. If it is a costly process, how can smaller for farmers be benefited? Well, we have seen it as possible, of course, through grouping up or economies of scale or partnering up. And in the last 20 years, we have been able to benefit from different standards and certifications. But there's also a risk that at the end, only the bigger producers will be able to benefit because of their financial capacity or muscle or technical capabilities that they have. And how to avoid this risk? Well, in such way that some companies can be benefited in allowing for others to continue to pollute and contaminate. So this is something this is an issue that's always on the table in this market. In the case of the Acorn platform, in this methodology they have, it is exclusively for smaller farmers that work with coffee and cocoa that work in 10 hectares at most. This is work focused only exclusively on smaller workers, farm workers, and no business owners or bigger farmers may be part of. They have different options, perhaps similar to what Ana Maria shared with us. They could partake in this type of investments because they have the resources, the financial muscles, they have connections, they have contacts, and they can materialize them into this type of projects and have a return over the investment in the mid and long term. In the case of anchoring in this relation with solidaridad or solidarity, the purpose is to foster the implementation of best practices in order to reduce emissions and stop reforestation and just have alternatives to, and they are offset for these best practices, these smaller producers, and this way they can also turn their business into a more profitable one. Smaller farmers, unfortunately, in most of food chains are the last link, right? So this is a way in which we can help them make their activities more profitable in a more proactive manner and fair and equitable manner. Thank you very much, Ezio. Gerardo, do you have any thoughts? Sure. Well, this all has to go through the drafting of public policy specifically for smaller and medium-sized producers, because first we need to provide support in the transition from their current state towards going green. That's where we can consider green bonds or carbon bonds. And I'm going to give an example that's just theoretical. I'm not familiar with it in reality, but I think this public policy has to be accompanied by private policy. And specifically by this, I mean that smaller producers face a huge challenge in terms of financing and economies of scale in order to embark on this transition. So there should be an association mechanism for smaller producers. And in addition to this association, this has to be tied to an anchoring to these um, tractor companies, meaning companies that have gone through all the process of certification, accreditation, and have already had access to carbon credits, so they can partner up with smaller producers in the same chain and could cut down this costly and large curve these processes entail. Unfortunately, our countries I think, as you and Anna can confirm this, there aren't so many projects in Latin America and the Caribbean around carbon bonds. This is something that is just growing. So therefore, mechanisms defined by public policies that tie this financing with this type of association with companies that have set the pace or have achieved some progress, that's a good thing. So, Ezio, I wanted to ask you: do you have a methodology? Have you managed to close all this cycle? Because I can assure you that this way to go can be more beneficial even for coffee growers in Peru. In other words, it's a matter of symbiosis with smaller and bigger players. It's the only way of achieving economies of scale. So in such way that companies can be also part of this market and can also have social responsibility and inclusion policy supported in profitability. Thank you. Thank you very much, Gerardo. Ana Maria, would you like to add any final comments in order to close our webinar? To be wrapping up soon. Yes, Nelson, in carbon markets, this is not something new. Carbon markets exist since many years ago, and many types of projects have been implemented from the onset when the Kyoto Protocol was signed. And we noticed a greater trend towards these with projects that had to do with energy or sanitary fill or transportation, chemical industry, technological, landfill sites, and so forth. So back then there was some forest related initiatives, but some others that had to do with reforestation and the use of soil. And these projects have a greater development and are being implemented more and more in our countries because there is the technology and something that Gerardo mentioned. Many first steps have been taken and many gains have been perceived in terms of knowledge, know-how, how to do things better, how to make smaller players a part of this market. So I believe with everything that happened in the conference of the parties, there's also many elements that boost these type of projects and foster the implementation thereof. There's something very important to bear in mind with smaller producers. It's also necessary to have a change in mindset, the mentality that has always prevailed. We know that human beings, for nature, are reluctant to change. And this type of projects imply a different practice with no hesitation. So fortunately, at present, there are positive experiences that prove that best practices can generate not only a better performance of crops, but also additional income and better conditions. So I think we are at a good place. There is inertia. There are gains that we have achieved. There's progress achieved. And this would allow for many other projects. That's why I think Colombia, there are topics regarding the use of soil. 175 registered projects that are generating credits also from the policy in our country. There are taxes around carbon. There's a carbon tax. So this also entails a boost. There are also policies regarding carbon taxes. So this speeds up the market. It makes it more dynamic and creates a demand. So from the supply side, then this makes it possible for the supply side to produce more projects. Thank you very much, Ana Maria, and thank you very much for our two or three panelists. I also wanted to thank the participation through social media. Many participants are highlighting the quality of presentations and our webinars and our answers. to the question. So I want to thank you once more for your presence, for being a part of this webinar. Thank you very much. And soon we will be producing a new series of these carbon market related matters. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a great day.